Canamore is at risk of losing his home if he can't come up with $350,000 soon. Well, Steph Curry once appeared in a music video in front of that home, shared on his Instagram a GoFundMe page dedicated to helping Canamore. And so far,
9-year-old girl who wrote a letter to NBA superstar Steph Curry. And in an interview you'll see only here on CBS This Morning, Dana Jacobson brings Curry and the fourth grader together.
Lisa was just an ordinary waitress, working hard to make ends meet. Every day was the same, serving customers, clearing tables, and making sure everyone was happy. But one night, something unexpected happened that changed her life forever. The restaurant was packed, and the air buzzed with excitement. A special guest had just walked in, Steph Curry, the NBA superstar. Lisa couldn't believe her eyes. She had served plenty of customers before, but this was different. As she moved around, she noticed something strange. The other waiters were hesitant, too nervous to serve him. Lisa didn't think twice. She stepped up, greeted him warmly, and made sure he had everything he needed. She treated him just like any other customer, with kindness and respect. But the next day, everything fell apart. Lisa walked into work, expecting another normal shift. Instead, her manager called her over with a serious expression. Before she could even process what was happening, she was fired. No explanation, no warning. Just like that, she lost her job. Her heart sank. Had she done something wrong? All she did was help a customer. Confused and devastated, she walked out of the restaurant, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But just when she thought her life had taken a terrible turn, something unbelievable happened, a twist she never saw coming. What happened next left her completely speechless. Amara had worked at Sonny's Diner for 3 years. It wasn't just a job, it was home. Every morning she greeted the same familiar faces. The older locals sipped their coffee, shared stories, and debated over basketball games. Amara loved the routine. The warm scent of fresh pies, the hum of friendly chatter, and the bell over the door jingling as regulars walked in it all felt like family. But one unexpected night, everything changed. The evening rush had just started when the doorbell rang. Amara barely looked up, expecting to see another regular. But when she did, her heart skipped a beat. Steph Curry. The Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors had just walked into the little diner in Berkeley, San Francisco. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Steph wore a simple hoodie and sneakers, trying to stay low-key, but there was no mistaking his presence. The entire diner fell silent. People turned their heads, whispered, and exchanged glances. A few even craned their necks to get a better look. Amara felt her pulse quicken. She had seen him dominate on the court countless times, but never did she imagine she'd be serving him dinner. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to his table, keeping her voice steady. "Good evening. What can I get for you tonight?" Steph looked up, flashing a kind smile. "Just a black coffee and whatever pie you've got." "Coming right up," she said, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. As she poured his coffee and grabbed a slice of apple pie, she noticed the buzz his presence was causing. Some regulars were excited, smiling, and sneaking glances. Others, not so much. One of them was Earl. Earl was an older man and a die-hard fan of the Sacramento Kings, the Warriors' biggest rivals. He was known for his blunt opinions and wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And tonight, he had something to say. As Amara set down Steph's coffee, Earl pushed back his chair and marched over. "Excuse me," Earl said, his gruff voice cutting through the diner's murmur. "Aren't you that basketball guy, Steph Curry?" Steph looked up, still calm. "Yeah, that's me." Earl crossed his arms, his face twisted with skepticism. "You make millions of dollars, right? But what do you do for people who need it?" The diner went silent. All eyes were on Steph. Amara's hands clenched the tray she was holding. She knew Steph Curry was more than just a basketball player. He had built schools, donated to charities, and helped communities in need. But before she could say anything, Steph responded, calm and steady. "I try to give back where I can," he said. "I've supported education programs, built basketball courts for kids, and funded charities." Earl scoffed. "Sounds like a PR stunt to me. You big shots only care about your image." Murmurs spread across the diner. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads. Amara couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward. "With all due respect, Earl," she said, her voice strong, "Steph has done more for the community than most people with his kind of success. He's not just a basketball player. He's someone who gives back." The diner went even quieter. Earl glared at her, but Amara didn't back down. She had spoken the truth. Steph looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then he smiled. "Thank you," he said softly. Earl muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving behind an awkward tension. But soon, the diner returned to normal. Steph finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and before leaving, he looked at Amara and said, "I won't forget this." Amara didn't think much of it. She was just doing what felt right. But the next day, everything fell apart. When she arrived at work, her manager was waiting for her arms crossed, an angry look on his face. "Amara, we need to talk." She frowned. "What's wrong?" He sighed, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have gotten involved last night. Some customers felt uncomfortable." Amara felt a cold wave rush through her. "I was just standing up for someone." The manager didn't care. "We can't have conflict like that here. You're fired." Just like that. No warning, no second chances. Amara stood there, stunned. How? Why? She had always been a good employee. She worked hard, treated customers kindly, and loved her job. And now, it was all gone. Heartbroken, she gathered her things and walked out. She had stood up for what was right, and it had cost her everything. But what Amara didn't know was that her story was far from over. The next morning, her phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in. Friends, family, even strangers. Her name was everywhere. She opened social media, and her jaw dropped. Her story had gone viral. A video from the diner had surfaced. People had recorded the moment she defended Steph Curry. Millions of people had seen it, and one comment stood out. It was from Steph Curry himself. "Someone find this waitress for me." Amara's heart pounded. What did he mean? Within hours, she got a call. A voice on the other end said, "Steph Curry wants to meet you." She couldn't believe it. Her life had changed overnight. And what happened next? It was bigger than anything she could have imagined. Amara loved her job at Sonny's Diner. For 3 years, she had been the friendly face that greeted customers, poured endless cups of coffee, and made sure everyone felt at home. The small diner in Berkeley wasn't just where she worked, it was where she belonged. The regulars knew her by name, and she had memorized their favorite meals. But one unexpected evening, everything changed. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation when the bell over the door rang. Amara barely glanced up, expecting another familiar face. But when she did, her heart skipped a beat. Steph Curry. The NBA superstar had just walked in. Dressed in a hoodie and sneakers, he seemed to be keeping a low profile, but there was no mistaking who he was. The diner went silent. Customers exchanged glances, whispers filled the air, and a few people turned in their seats to get a better look. Amara felt her pulse race. She had watched him dominate the court for years, but she never thought she'd be serving him dinner. Taking a deep breath, she approached his table, keeping her voice steady. "Good evening." "What can I get for you tonight?" Steph looked up, his warm smile instantly easing her nerves. "Just a black coffee and whatever pie you've got." "Coming right up," she said, feeling a rush of excitement. As she poured his coffee, she couldn't ignore the buzz his presence had caused. Some customers were thrilled, sneaking glances and whispering excitedly. Others, however, didn't seem happy. One of them was Earl. Earl was a longtime regular, a loyal Sacramento Kings fan, and known for his blunt opinions. He had never been shy about criticizing the Warriors, and tonight was no different. As Amara placed the coffee in front of Steph, Earl pushed back his chair and walked over. "Aren't you that basketball guy? Steph Curry?" Earl's voice was loud and direct. Steph looked up, still calm. "Yeah, that's me." Earl folded his arms. "You make millions of dollars, but what do you do for the people who need help?" The diner fell silent. All eyes were on them. Amara felt a wave of frustration rise in her chest. She knew Steph wasn't just a basketball player he had given back in countless ways. Before she could speak, Steph responded, his voice steady. "I try to give back where I can," he said. "I've helped build schools, supported charities, and created programs for kids." Earl scoffed. "Sounds like a publicity stunt. People like you only care about looking good." Murmurs spread across the diner. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Amara couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward. "That's not true," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside. "Steph has given scholarships to students who couldn't afford college. He's donated to disaster relief and supported mental health programs. He doesn't have to do any of that, but he does, because he cares." Earl's brow furrowed. "And you believe all that? How do you know he's not just doing it for the attention?" "Because actions speak louder than words," Amara replied, her confidence growing. "I've read about the kids whose lives have changed because of his work. He's done more than most people ever will." Steph looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. The diner buzzed with whispers. Some customers seemed moved by her words, while others remained skeptical. Earl muttered something under his breath and returned to his seat, but the damage was already done. Amara noticed Mr. Sullivan, the diner's owner, stepping out of the kitchen. His expression was dark. "Amara," he said sharply, motioning her over. Her stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't going to be good. As she approached, his voice dropped to a serious tone. "What were you thinking?" he asked. "You don't argue with customers, especially regulars like Earl." Amara's heart pounded. "I wasn't arguing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was standing up for someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way." Mr. Sullivan shook his head. "This is a business, not a debate club. Earl and the other regulars keep this place running. If they're upset, we lose customers. I can't risk that." Amara felt a sinking feeling. "You're firing me for defending someone?" Mr. Sullivan's face was unreadable. "I think it's best if you find another job." The words hit her like a punch. She had given everything to this diner, her time, her energy, her kindness, and now, over one moment of standing up for what was right, it was all gone. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She grabbed her things, keeping her head high. As she passed Steph's table, he stood up. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You didn't have to do that, but it meant a lot." Amara forced a small smile. "You're welcome." The next morning, Amara woke up feeling like her world had collapsed. For 3 years, she had poured her heart into her job, only to lose it in an instant. The sting of betrayal from Mr. Sullivan still felt fresh. As she lay in bed, her phone buzzed, then again, and again. Frowning, she picked it up. Dozens of messages filled her screen. Friends, family, even strangers. Her name was everywhere. Confused, she opened social media, then froze. A video from the diner had gone viral. Someone had recorded the entire exchange, and millions of people had seen it. One comment stood out. It was from Steph Curry himself. "Someone find this waitress for me." Amara's heart raced. What did this mean? Within hours, she got a phone call. A voice on the other end said, "Steph Curry wants to meet you." She couldn't believe it. Her life had changed overnight. And what happened next? It was bigger than anything she could have imagined. The regular customers stared at Amara, their silent judgment feeling worse than Earl's harsh words. The next morning, she woke up with a heavy heart. The memories of the previous night looped in her mind like a bad dream. Sonny's Diner had been more than just a job. It was a place where she felt safe, surrounded by familiar faces, laughter, and daily routines. It had felt like home. But in just a few moments, everything changed, all because she stood up for someone. She had believed that doing the right thing mattered, but now she wasn't so sure. The world didn't always seem to care about fairness or kindness. Still, life moved on. Rent was due. Bills needed to be paid. Taking a deep breath, Amara prepared herself to return to the diner one last time, to pick up her final paycheck. The thought of going back made her stomach twist. She could already imagine the stares, the whispers, the quiet disapproval from people she once thought of as friends. But she had no choice. She needed the money until she could find a new job. The morning air was crisp as she walked through the quiet streets of San Francisco. The golden light of the rising sun made the city glow, but Amara barely noticed. Her thoughts were too clouded. She reminded herself to hold her head high. She had spoken the truth. She had nothing to be ashamed of. As she approached Sonny's Diner, something unusual caught her eye. A sleek black SUV was parked right outside. Its polished surface gleamed in the sunlight. It looked completely out of place in front of the small, slightly worn-down diner. Amara hesitated, confused. Who would drive a car like that here? Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. Instead of the usual buzz of conversation, there was silence. The air felt thick with tension. Amara's eyes landed on Steph Curry. He was sitting in one of the booths, looking completely calm and confident. Though he wore a simple sweatshirt, jeans, and a baseball cap, there was no mistaking his presence. Mr. Sullivan, the diner's owner, stood behind the counter, looking frozen. His face was stiff with uncertainty and nerves. The regulars sat quietly, their eyes darting between Amara and Steph. Something about the scene felt different. Then Steph stood up. "Amara," he said, his voice warm and steady, "can we talk?" Her heart pounded. She nodded and walked toward him, ignoring the stares burning into her back. For once, she didn't care. She slid into the booth across from him, trying to stay calm, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened last night," Steph began, his voice gentle yet serious. "You stood up for me when you didn't have to. That means more to me than I can explain." Amara blinked, struggling to find the right words. "I just thought you deserved someone to stand up for you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Steph leaned in slightly, his eyes kind. "And that's exactly why I'm here," he continued. "What you did took courage. You stood up for what's right, even when it cost you everything. That's rare. And it's something I truly admire." Amara tilted her head, confused and unsure. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why are you here?" Steph smiled, his face both kind and determined. "My foundation is growing," he explained. "We're starting new programs to help kids in need, improve education, and give people a second chance. We need strong, passionate people like you." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Completely," Steph said without hesitation. "It's not waiting tables, but it's a chance to be part of something bigger. You'll use your voice, your heart, and your courage to make a real difference." For a moment, Amara just sat there, stunned. The weight of his words hit her. She had lost her job, yet now she was being offered an incredible opportunity, something she never imagined possible. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to process everything. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Say yes," Steph grinned. A small laugh escaped her lips, mixing with her tears. Then, without hesitation, she nodded with a wide, tearful smile. "Yes, absolutely yes." Steph reached across the table and shook her hand, sealing the deal. The diner was silent. The same regulars who had once judged her now sat stunned, their mouths slightly open. Amara glanced at Earl. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with what looked like reluctant respect. Behind the counter, Mr. Sullivan stood frozen. His jaw was tight, his expression hard to read, but Amara caught a glimpse of something else: guilt. She didn't dwell on it. Her focus was on the future. As Steph stood to leave, he turned back toward her. "I'll have my team reach out to you today," he said. "Thank you for what you did. It meant more than you know." The bell above the door chimed as he walked out, the sound ringing through the diner like the closing of one chapter and the start of another. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with her head held high, she walked to the counter to collect her paycheck. Mr. Sullivan handed it to her, his face filled with regret. After a pause, he sighed and muttered, "I still think you shouldn't have done what you did last night, but I'm sorry for how I treated you." Amara met his gaze steadily. "You taught me something important," she replied. "Sometimes standing up for what's right is more valuable than staying silent just to keep a job." With that, she turned and walked out the door toward a future filled with new possibilities. Amara stepped outside, the warm sunlight touching her face. She took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in days. For the first time since losing her job, she felt hopeful. In the weeks that followed, her life changed completely. She joined Steph Curry's foundation and quickly found herself doing work that truly mattered. No longer just serving food at a diner, she was now helping people in real ways. She traveled to neighborhoods where kids struggled to get a good education. She helped set up classrooms, deliver school supplies, and organize sports programs that gave children a safe space to play and dream. Seeing the smiles on their faces made her heart swell with pride. Every day brought new challenges, but Amara loved every moment. She met students who had once lost hope, parents who had been desperate for help, and teachers who worked hard despite having few resources. One day, while setting up a learning center, a young girl named Maya tugged on Amara's sleeve. "Are you a teacher?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Amara smiled and shook her head. "Not exactly, but I'm here to help make sure kids like you have everything you need to learn." Maya grinned. "I want to be a doctor one day. Do you think I can?" Amara felt a lump in her throat. She knelt and looked Maya in the eyes. "I know you can," she said firmly, "and we're here to help you get there." As days turned into weeks, Amara realized something important. Losing her job at the diner hadn't been the disaster she thought it was. Instead, it had been the beginning of something greater. She had once feared that speaking up for what was right would cost her everything. But instead, it had opened doors she never imagined. One simple act of kindness and courage had led her to a life where her voice mattered. She was no longer just another waitress at a small-town diner. She was now part of a team changing lives. Looking back, Amara saw how much she had grown. She had learned that sometimes taking a stand wasn't easy. Sometimes people judge and criticize. But if you believe in what is right, the risk is always worth it. As she stood in a bustling community center, watching kids run around with bright smiles, she knew she had found her true purpose. One moment had changed everything, and she wouldn't trade it for the world. Amara's story is a powerful reminder that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. She stood up for someone when no one else did, even though it cost her job. But in return, she gained something even greater, a chance to change lives and make a real difference. Her journey teaches us that sometimes life pushes us out of our comfort zone for a reason. What seemed like a terrible loss turned into a new beginning for Amara. She found her true calling, not just as a waitress in a small diner, but as someone who inspires and uplifts others. It also reminds us that kindness and courage never go unnoticed. When Amara defended Steph Curry, she wasn't looking for a reward. She simply believed in fairness and respect. Yet, that one moment of bravery led her to an opportunity beyond her wildest dreams. So, what can we learn from her story? That speaking up, even when it's hard, can change everything. That losing something familiar can lead to something better. And that standing by your values is always the right choice. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Would you have done the same in Amara's place? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for reading. And remember, sometimes one bold decision can open doors you never even knew existed. See you in the next story. Ha ha.